Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the Smartlogic webinar done in conjunction with Merck on how to use content intelligence to improve knowledge management from development to manufacturing. We're very glad to see you here today. We will do this broadcast with all of the attendees in listen-only mode. If you have questions, you'll see a question box on your screen on the right-hand side in the GoToWebinar console. Please use that to enter your questions. We will get to as many of them during the broadcast as we can. Any questions which we can't answer, we will certainly respond to you after the broadcast by email. Once again, thank you for coming, and now let's begin. My name is Ann Lapkin. I manage the execution of Smartlogic's global strategy, and with me today are Adam Duckworth, who is the Associate Director of the Knowledge Management Center of Excellence for Merck Manufacturing Division, which is responsible for Merck manufacturing worldwide, and also Douglas Arnold, who is the Director and Account Manager for Knowledge Management for Merck Manufacturing Division Information Technology. This is the agenda that we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about Smartlogic. We're going to talk a little bit about who and what Merck is. We're going to talk about some of the challenges they faced and how they resolved those challenges and what the outcome was, what kind of results they got. Then we're going to talk a little bit about this thing called content intelligence, which is part of the Merck solution, and then we're going to open the floor up to questions. So, from a Smartlogic perspective, we are interested in the 80% of the intelligence in your organization which is locked away in the content, in that not machine processable information assets that comprise the vast majority of the information in your enterprise, and which are actually growing substantially faster than the structured information that we've actually figured out how to manipulate and how to use in some very innovative ways. We believe that the huge business value that's locked away in content is something that organizations need to unlock in order to maintain competitive advantage and succeed in the marketplace. And it's actually not only us. Gartner also believes this. They produced a prediction two or 3 years ago that said that through 2015, organizations that were able to integrate the high-value, diverse information from new information sources into a coherent information management infrastructure would outperform their industry peers financially by more than 20%. And if you think about the economics of your business, 20% outperformance is actually pretty substantial. We're going to talk just briefly about this content intelligence thing that we keep mentioning because it is critical to Merck's solution and is critical to the ability to actually unlock the value in content. It is a combination of technology and information science, and the crux of it is to allow machines to do things with content that they could never do before, to actually model, interpret, describe, analyze, and visualize the content of the enterprise in order to leverage the human intelligence that's locked in that content. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam to talk a little bit about Merck and what Merck is, the challenges that they faced, and how they solved their problems. Adam?
Thanks, Ann, and hello, everyone. I'm leading off with this slide partially to tell you a little bit about Merck, but more so to set the context of the environment that we operate in. So we are a healthcare company. But it's important to know that we have multiple lines of business. So we're in pharmaceuticals, vaccines, biologics, and animal health. And some other key things I'd like to highlight here is that we have 22 products in late-stage development and many more that are currently on the market. We're very much externally focused, so when we think about managing our knowledge, we have to think about managing our knowledge across CROs, contract research organizations, CMOs, which are contract manufacturing organizations. So that adds a different nuance to how we look at our problems and our solutions. And then also, we're just a very large company. So we have 73,000 employees. And as Ann mentioned, I'm part of a divisional center of excellence for knowledge management. So I'm focused on manufacturing mostly, which is about 27,000 or so of those 73,000 employees. And for those of you, we probably have some individuals on the phone that are also part of large companies, so you can probably relate to this. Something else that might set you, Merck off, or a company like Merck off a little bit from others is our product lead time. And if you move to the next slide. For us, it's important to set the context here as well. So this presents some very unique challenges for us from a knowledge management perspective. And I just wanted to give a brief overview of our drug development process and some of the complexities of it. So here, if we think about the discovery phase of a drug, this is where at any given time, Merck's looking at thousands of compounds to identify those few critical compounds that are have the great potential to become wonderful products someday. So in this situation, you have a handful of people maybe that are working in the lab, creating some recipes and running some experiments for any given compound at a time, and they're working out of a couple locations where they might manage their information or their knowledge. So things like share drives and SharePoint sites and paper notebooks and emails, etc. Once you move on for discovery, so during that phase, which is a couple years, you have you whittle your number of compounds down to those few key critical ones that you want to start to think about turning into a viable product. And we call that the commercialization phase, which for us encompasses both preclinical and clinical development. And here we're scaling it up. So we're bringing in more individuals to start to look at how do we go through different versions of a manufacturing process to find the most cost-effective, environmentally friendly process that will allow us to manufacture at large scale. We're going through different versions of methods to characterize our products, and you're involving many different groups like safety groups, analytical groups, engineering groups around the globe, and both internally and externally at this point. And all of these groups traditionally at Merck have often been operating out of their own unique locations where they store their information and their own unique processes by how they do their work. So again, we're still in file shares and paper documents and email and team sites, which are SharePoint sites for us. As we commercialize and we get closer to launching a product, we start to think about regulatory approval. So typically we're filing first in the US, but then even once we file and get that first approval, we're continuing to file in other countries. So now we're bringing in additional groups like regulatory groups who are working on filings and still interacting with a lot of the scientists and technical teams that have been commercializing the compound over the past few years. And at this point, too, we start to get into regulatory systems where we have to really carefully manage our information because there's a regulatory aspect to it. So while that's ongoing, and as we're continuing to file new drug applications around the world, we move into the supply space as well. And if you want to share that. So this is where we're establishing manufacturing capabilities around the globe in many, many different countries to manufacture both our API, our active pharmaceutical ingredient, our drug substance, our drug product, which is the final tablet or pill that you see in the pharmacy, including the way we package those products as well. And even though once it's in supply, we're manufacturing it for market, we're still undergoing process improvements and thinking about the next generation of a manufacturing process to continually improve. We're going through change controls and filing those change controls with regulatory bodies around the world. We're solving manufacturing problems as they come up. All of this continues to generate just loads and loads of valuable information. And you can see here, this is a great graphic, and I think even this graphic doesn't fully represent the complexity of this or the amount of information we have, but we're talking just in our small molecule line of business alone, you're talking millions of documents that are exactly like Ann mentioned. They're unstructured content. They're not in a database, so and have traditionally been managed very disparately across the organization. So let's move on to the next slide, Ann, and that kind of sets the stage for the problem that we were facing a couple of years ago when we embarked on our journey. Being a knowledge management COE, we have a deep toolkit for knowledge management tools, and one of those tools is called knowledge mapping or knowledge flow analysis. And you can see the graphic on the left there. One of the first activities we did was look at our business processes, that drug development process that you just saw, and said, where is the information, the knowledge not flowing well, and where is that creating the biggest impact or the biggest risk? And we identified those locations, and you can see on the right there, we started interviewing stakeholders and heard the voice of customer, which I'm sure resonates with everyone on this call. Difficult to locate knowledge, no common standards, don't know where to go to access it. The list goes on, and it's pretty familiar VOC, I think, from everyone's perspective. So, we took this VOC, and then we started to think about, our solution. So if we move into the next slide, Ann. So here we're sharing the graphic again around the drug development process, but we've overlaid some information here to talk about how we approached our solution. So if we think about that top layer as the knowledge or the information that's generated during the drug development process, the question becomes, how do you manage that in a way where not only can teams collaborate on it in the time that they're creating it and generating it and needing to use it in the near term, but also how do you reference that later to solve problems more quickly and deliver business outcomes? But then also, how do you feed that back in earlier to the process so that when you create your next medicine, and as that comes through the pipeline, you're not repeating the same mistakes that you did in the past? And one of the ways we're tackling this, if we jump to that bottom layer there, is to start to standardize and consolidate a lot of the information that's generated. So specifically, we're focusing on the type of information that's in share drives and SharePoint sites or team spaces. And we're starting to standardize this into a single SharePoint-based system we call the technical knowledge system. And one of the important things I want to highlight here is that it's folderless. And that's where the Smartlogic product and Content Intelligence becomes very important for us. So we have a SharePoint-based solution where we're not using any folders. It's purely driven by metadata. And the other thing I'll say, just to highlight that, we're not replacing all the systems, and that's specifically why we have that box just partially covering those. So we still have our regulatory systems and some other systems that are really, have very specific purposes. But a bulk of the knowledge, a bulk of the information that's generated by our scientists and technical teams is really just helping them do their day-to-day jobs, and we're trying to unlock the value of that to make that more reusable in the future. Sorry, stay back one last time, man. Yeah, so I did want to specifically talk a little bit about the content intelligence layer there, because due to the nature of the webinar here, that's the important piece. So for Merck right now, there's two things that really means to us. So that content intelligence layer means number one, which is a consistent taxonomy that our business stakeholders have designed to help us manage information in that technical knowledge system. And the Smartlogic tool, Semaphore, really gives us a great way, specifically for the business, to manage their own term sets in how they want to classify and organize their information. So that was really a great enabler for us to enable the business to manage their own information. And it also integrates with the SharePoint-based technical knowledge system. So it's a great way for us to be able to keep that up to date and keep evolving it over time. The second aspect of that content intelligence layer for us is auto-classification. So this technical knowledge system that we have is great for new information that our scientists are creating in our technical teams. but we have more than 2 million historical documents out there that are not consistently organized or classified or tagged in any specific way. So we're using the Smartlogic tool in combination with another third-party tool to move all of that content into the new system, and at the same time, using the business rules that we've designed, are auto-classifying it with the new consistent taxonomy that we have to help our business stakeholders find their information very, very quickly. Now you can move on, Ann. Thank you. So we've been in production using this system live for about 2 years now, and we recently polled one of our project teams that has been using it since very early on, and we got a lot of great information from them, a lot of very positive feedback. And you can see here, I'm not going to speak to all of these items, but I will call out a couple. So the first two, around reducing time to onboard new team members and leveraging temporary help, that's really a big focus for us because we're looking for ways to be more nimble, more flexible, do more with less. So the ability to be able to shift people around is really a big win for us. If you look towards the bottom, I want to highlight those two as well. So seeking information before asking someone and seeking information before beginning my work, that's from a change management perspective, a behavior that we're really trying to drive to be a knowledge-seeking organization. And ultimately, all of these things we've translated into business outcomes. So we have similar results that say, because I'm able to find information more quickly, because I seek information before beginning my work, I develop a more robust manufacturing process, and I complete a transfer from one manufacturing site to another more quickly. And we're linking it to real business outcomes. So that's been very positive for us. Okay, Ann?
Okay, thank you. So moving back to talk about this content intelligence thing, we said that content intelligence was a combination of semantic technology and information science. And the Smartlogic Semaphore platform is what provides the semantic technology, but the information science is a critical component of this as well. One of the things that Adam mentioned to you was the fact that we have business users who are actually modeling their domain space and defining the terms that they want to use to classify information in a way that actually works for them. That is a critical component, being able to describe the problem domain in such a way that we can then actually use the taxonomy, the ontology, the concepts and the relationships between them, and we can interpret that model in order to create those classification rules. Anyone who has done this, I'm sure many of you on the line have done this more than once, everyone knows that the most significant problem in the development of any kind of knowledge organization system is to define the rules by which the knowledge will be organized. And so being able to use the model to derive the rules, to interpret the model in order to understand the relationships, allows you then to describe the content, to actually look at each piece of content and do fundamentally the same thing a human would, determine what it's about, determine what the relevant facts are, determine what the salient components of that knowledge are, and then to actually do a thing that humans very, very rarely do, which is to append the appropriate metadata tags so that that piece of information can now be analyzed in a machine-oriented way. One of the big problems about content analysis in the past has been the fact that it's been very, very difficult for machines to interpret what a piece of content is actually about. Because of that, search engines don't actually work well and very often bring back results which are not particularly relevant to the line of inquiry that the user is actually pursuing. That's one of the reasons that it's been very hard to insert content into workflows in a truly automated way. So the ability to describe the content based on the classification rules, based on the model, in a way that allows machines to automate a lot of those processes has been truly powerful for Merck and is very powerful for others as well. And then, of course, you also want to be able to visualize the results, because cognitive science has taught us that humans do best when they're actually able to comprehend something from a picture, as opposed to a lot of lines of data, which is probably the reason that we don't see very much in way of green bar reports anymore. Semaphore's ontology server is the component that we use to actually model the domain space. It is a very easy tool to use and is used by business users who can actually sit and say, this is my preferred term for this, here are the synonyms for this preferred term, this is the relationship that this concept has with other concepts, and they are able to introduce a level of business relevance and business understanding to the model that actually makes the model very, very effective. We can then generate a rules base, and the rules base can be edited and modified in order to be able to do the auto classification with the Semaphore component called classification server. The advanced language packs are the component that actually allow us to analyze the information, pull out salient points, do entity extraction, sentiment extraction, and so on and so forth. And we can do this, by the way, in upwards of 25 languages. And the semantic enhancement server is the components that actually provide the visualization capabilities and provide the improved user experience that allow you to do things like traverse the knowledge set in ways that are indicated by the relationships in the model, but which would not necessarily be indicated in the content itself, particularly if you're talking about a folderless SharePoint environment. One of the big barriers to getting true effectiveness out of SharePoint has been the whole concept of folders. Because if you're going to look for something, you have to be able to, number one, remember which folder you put it in, or be able to imagine which folder somebody else might have put it in order to be able to find it effectively. By depending entirely on the metadata that is associated with the knowledge asset and removing the concept of folders completely, the user experience has actually been vastly improved. I think Adam and Douglas will agree. So Semaphore in a nutshell is about resource description and authoring. You can either do classification in an automated way, or you can do it in an assisted way, whereas an asset is being committed to the knowledge store, you can actually suggest to the user the metadata that should be appended to it. You have the ability to discover and surface knowledge because you have metadata-driven search and navigation as opposed to keyword-driven search and navigation, because keyword-driven search and navigation, if you type in the word couch, will only return to you those knowledge assets where the word couch appears. In a contextually meta-driven search and navigation environment, you will not only get documents that contain the word couch, but also documents that contain the word sofa, because in the model you specified sofa as a synonym for couch. And it will also tell you that there are other relevant documents on related concepts, such as furniture. And then, of course, the ability to do the modeling, to design the model in a way that is friendly to business users and allows you to truly collaborate in the enrichment of your taxonomies and ontologies. And then I'm going to turn it over to Douglas for a couple of minutes to talk about, if I can get this thing to move, to talk about the things Merck did well, the lessons that they learned, and the recommendations that they have for all of you moving forward, and then we will open it up to questions.
Great. Thanks,
Douglas?
Ann. Yep. Thanks, Ann. So as you've heard today, by leveraging good KM principles and the power of Smartlogic's content intelligence, we've been able to consolidate our authoritative content into a single source of truth. And as a result of this, our knowledge workers are no longer wasting time looking for information, and even more importantly, they're no longer wasting time recreating information that they couldn't find. Through this effort, we were also able to demonstrate that by leveraging Smartlogic's auto-classification capability, that we were able to eliminate intense manual resources for processing, classifying, and tagging our historical content with a $2.4 million targeted savings. And just for this part, that auto-classification capability, we actually expect our return on investment to be paid back within 1.5 years. And once the solution is fully adopted across the organization, we anticipate our annual savings, which includes, enhanced findability and the elimination of the recreating of content at over $10 million on an annual basis. So in summary, our recommendations, going forward are focused in 4 key areas. The first is really around following good KM practices. So focus on people, process, content, and the technology. Second, remember this is a journey with multiple stages. We thought big up front. We started small, and then we moved fast to get it into the environment and start using it. Third, don't over-engineer it. Developing the taxonomy and the business rules is an iterative process, and it takes time. So, linking to that second item, start with something and then iterate on it over time. And then lastly, as Ann talked about and Adam talked about, automate where you can. We were able to gain a lot of efficiency and savings by leveraging the full capabilities of Smartlogic's toolset in our environment. And as Adam mentioned, it's already starting to demonstrate a lot of success from a business user experience perspective. So on that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay, Kelly, first of all, do we have any housekeeping questions that we want to address?
Just that I've gotten a few questions about the webinar being recorded, and the webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording about 2 days after the event. So.
Okay. Excuse me. So one question that has come in through the question pipeline is, can you share any information on how the taxonomy is governed?
Sure, Ann, I'll take that one. So it was important for us when we first started, and this is going back a couple of years ago now, that the leader of our taxonomy work stream when we started the project was a business person. He was actually an analytical chemist in one of our organizations, and it was a group of business individuals that were responsible for designing the taxonomy in conjunction with some knowledge management guidance and some external partnerships. But that really set us up to have good engagement once we went live. And now we maintain a steering committee of business stakeholders across that drug development process that you saw. And we poll them. Actually, just to share a situation from the last 2 days here, we had some proposed changes that came through, and we reached out to our steering committee members and some of our super users, and we had, within 48 hours, input from 12 different individuals that represented 2 divisions and 3 large organizations within MMD, including additionally knowledge management and information technology. So we're lucky that we've just continued to maintain that engagement from design through sustainment. And it also, I'll just say, speaks to, from a knowledge management perspective, how we approach capabilities is the idea of people, process, content, and technology in that order of importance, and thinking about people and change management first as a priority has really helped to position us for good governance.
There's a related question that came in, which is, did you start with an off-the-shelf taxonomy at all, or did you develop the taxonomy internally?
Good question. So I would say 90% was internal development. There were some aspects of our taxonomy. So, for example, dosage form is a popular term set or vocabulary, if you will, in the pharmaceutical space. So we did evaluate some externally available taxonomies and term sets at the time, but it was a large part internally developed.
And Adam, this is Douglas. I mean, I would just add one extra thing. I mean, and this is, I think, one of the learnings, right? So we essentially built our taxonomy top-down using some traditional card sorting techniques and other methods. And at the time, we didn't have an ontology management text mining tool like Smartlogic in our environment. So I think there's probably, from a best practice perspective, a combination of both that top-down plus being able to have that text mining capability to inform how people have written about things versus how they spoke about things to help define and create what I would call an ideal taxonomy. And that's what we've been doing over time now as we have Smartlogic in our environment, as we're refining our process and our business rules over time on document sets.
Yeah, good add. Thank you.
Okay, there was another question around ontologies that was asked, and that is whether Semaphore can leverage imported ontologies to extend the knowledge base, and the answer to that is unequivocally yes. We are very, very often in a situation where a customer wants to start with an external ontology, which they then extend and customize to their organization. There's some really, really good questions here. This is pretty cool. There are a couple of questions around how you gained business buy-in and what you did. So one question is, how did you start this off? Did you try and build it yourself or try things with a variety of vendors? And then the second question was, how small or how large was your initial pilot, and what were the main barriers you had in selling your approach to management?
Good questions. Yeah, I love these questions. Keep them coming, everyone. So I'd say that. So I'd say there's a deep question, but I'd say you saw that graphic where we had voice to customer and we did what we call the knowledge mapping activity. So I think to really gain business buy-in, you really have to clearly link it to a desired business outcome. So there was clearly a case in our drug development process where there were issues. We were recreating the wheel. We weren't solving problems fast enough because people couldn't find the information or the other SMEs or the knowledge that they were looking for and needed to do their job. So I think that's your first step, is really to tie it to business outcome and develop a plan in how you will measure that based on impact to the business. Measures I shared during our presentation here, I mean, those are great measures and those are helpful and we use them to validate assumptions, but those don't show direct impact to the business, and that's critical. I will say that in doing that, we also built great sponsorship in some key individuals, and you won't get everyone on board in the beginning, but if you can find those key individuals and hang on to them, and keep ensure that they sponsor you well, then that's really going to set you for success. So I can guarantee you that there's some leaders in your organization, whichever organization that might be, that will see huge value in better information and knowledge management, and if you can find them and make them happy by making their business better, and that's going to be a great first step.
Yep, and I would just add to that, I mean, a little bit too, this is Douglas again, from an IT perspective, you know, linking to those outcomes that Adam was talking about, we actually build very detailed business cases. And as part of those business cases, we need to be able to document the return on the investment that we're introducing into the environment, and that's what I talked about in that last slide, that $2.5 million savings that we're getting payback on in less than a year and a half. So it's those things that were really helped us convince our senior management to move forward, putting in the technical capability to help support our business partners.
Yeah, my experience with this is that no one, precisely no one, embarks on a journey like this in order to make the data prettier. Everybody is doing it for one of three reasons. They either want to save money, they want to be able to make more money, or they want to be able to stay out of jail. Regulatory requirements are a key driver in many, many cases. But the ability to tie this either to a cost savings or to a revenue increase makes the combination, makes the business case very, very powerful. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, I would agree.
Okay.
And I'll just add, I don't think we answered the full question there. They asked about how we started regarding a pilot, and I will say that we did pick two products, two specific products to start with. Developed a solution, you know, based on some of the tools we had available at the time, evaluated that. We actually changed our approach to how we handled our taxonomy and how we managed that going into our larger scale end state solution. So to start taking that baby step was really important for us, and have a better end state.
Okay. Douglas, this is really a question for you. My company is new to the whole idea of using metadata to build an ontology. Are there any general rules of thumb that you can share to ensure a successful experience?
Actually, why don't we have Adam answer that one?
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'd say, so I think we talked about some already, you know, certainly tying to business outcomes, finding good sponsorship, etc. I will certainly say there is no shortage of work you will have to do to change people's mindsets around moving from folders to metadata. So when you think about change management and that whole idea of people, process, content, technology, I mean, we're into this, you know, multiple years now, and even though we show business value, we have a lot of positive feedback, we still have, you know, individuals that come back and say, can we just add a few folders back in? I really love folders. So, you know, it's really about, you know, sitting down with, you know, your users and saying, you know, help me understand what you can do with folders that you can't do with metadata, having some of those conversations, maybe showing them some examples of, you know, if you want this particular folder structure, the same type of thing with metadata, here's how you do it, you know, by filtering or sorting or grouping or doing these types of things. But it is a complete mindset change for people after using folders for so many years. So that's just something you have to put some continual focus on, you know, during the beginning, and you know, just monitor that as you move forward. That would be one aspect. Douglas, other things to add?
No, I think you've covered it.
There's an interesting question here about scope, and what the question is as follows. Your presentation describes an implementation in manufacturing. Have you expanded it to include documents in research and in the commercialization phases, and do those phases require different taxonomy terms?
Another good one. All right, so I'll first highlight that the original design team we had representation from both those commercialization and supply areas. So the acknowledgement early on that we had to bring the stakeholders together to work together first was very key for us, and was a great decision that we made at the time. It was certainly a lot of work. I mean, not even across the the life cycle as you saw it there, but just, I mean, across different sites, people in the same organizations across different sites. We operate very siloed. So there's some work and give and take, and you have to continually remind people that we're here working for the greater good, while we're asking you to change your business processes and business practices. We're also saying that if you do, it will actually improve the way you operate, because you'll be able to better find information that other people generate, whether it be other people you're working with at a current time, or for another product, or in supply versus commercialization. So you have to remind people of the benefit, that you're working for the greater good, and that it will pay back down the road. But to get all those stakeholders together is important. We did do that, so we have one aligned taxonomy across the life cycle. Don't go back into discovery, and that's why I didn't show the box over that there, specifically because our knowledge domain is product technical knowledge, and we don't think about a product until it reaches a certain point in the process. So we don't go that far back, but we certainly span 10 years, well, I guess you'd say 50 years of work, so it's quite large. The one other thing I'll share is that our approach to taxonomy design has been what we call multifaceted. So we, some of you, if you're playing this space already, this might make more sense to you, but we think about being broad and shallow. So we have a number of different facets that you can assign metadata for, so things like topic and document type and document purpose, but we don't go very deep there. And the idea is that we can have some very high-level terms, and the way people find what they're looking for is by combining terms from different facets to limit your search, rather than going to a single term that's going to get them to the 5 documents they're looking for. And that allows us to keep it at a level that can apply to the entire business.
Okay, there's another really good question here. I would like to hear more about the experience tweaking and customizing the auto-classification rule base. Which tweaks made the most difference for you?
Yeah, so I'd say this has been a learning experience, and we've learned a lot as we've gone through this. And I'd say Smartlogic has been really great in working with us. So we found that, I'll share a lesson learned for us so far, is that because we're moving content from a folder, repositories where there's rich folder structures and no metadata, into a new system where it's only metadata, we've actually found that leveraging the folder path and file name for auto-classification has been incredibly valuable to us. And that's actually been a lot of our focus, and has enabled us to get very good results so far. Now I think it's because I think the reason why that's so valuable for us is because we're in the process of moving content. Our next phase for us is going to be looking more closely at all the content we have in this new technical knowledge system where there are no folders, and then we're going to have to shift our focus to depend more on looking at the content itself. So that's, I can't speak to that as much right now, but I'd say so far we found that if you're moving content, then looking at the folder path and file name, that acts as your metadata in many cases, and you can pick a lot of good information out of there.
Okay, there's also a question asking you to go into more detail about how you quantified the benefits.
Douglas, you want to talk about our business case a little bit? Yeah, so we actually broke it out into 3 components, right? So how long it takes someone to find information, how much time is wasted when someone can't find information and need to recreate it, and then lastly the automation piece, right? So if we had to actually have a user physically move the content independently, and then as they're moving the content into the new environment, apply the auto tags to it. So we basically came up with some assumptions, but those assumptions were based on some of our initial pilot studies where For instance, we had introduced in our pilot a survey that helped us quantify how much time was saved finding information. So we used that metric, then expanded across all our different products and organizations based on our adoption rate to ultimately, give us an overall rate of findability return for the overall organization in our desired state. Likewise, we did some basic estimates and assumptions around what would happen if you have to recreate the content. So we broke that into very simple documents that you might have to recreate versus if you lose a document and can't find a document that was the result of an experiment that took you 3 months to execute. So you would actually need to re-execute the experiment. So that's a tremendous waste of time. So we then factored the recreation into different buckets of those 3 different dimensions, and then factored that by the likelihood of occurrence to come up with the number. And then the auto-classification piece was just based on, pure human metrics, what it takes for a human to do it versus a machine, then quantifying that over the 2 million documents that we are anticipating to move in our first wave.
Okay, there have been a couple of questions about the entire stack that you used in your solution. So let me share with the audience that there were essentially 3 components to this. One is the repository, which is SharePoint. The second is the content intelligence solution, which is Smartlogic Semaphore, which is the thing that actually goes through and classifies all of the content, applies the metadata, and so on and so forth. There was a third tool, which I believe was Kapow. Is that correct, Douglas?
Yes, that's correct. So
which
Kapow
is used to actually take the information out of the file shares and team sites and whatnot where it existed and migrate it into the new repository. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So basically, Kapow picks up the information from where it is, but it picks everything up, hands it off to Semaphore, which does the classification and applies the metadata based on the rules that are derived from the model, and SharePoint is the final repository where the item is stored. Have I got that right?
You've got it correct. Yeah, we actually have all in the file shares too, but we actually have 2 SharePoint environments, one that we call commodity, which is SharePoint out of the box, and then SharePoint enhanced, where we allow, like with our TK solution, a more enhanced capability that has the things that we've been talking about in it.
Okay. There's another question here about whether you only included SharePoint resources or whether you include non-SharePoint resources as well. And I believe you said that you're importing from a variety of sources, SharePoint and others, but the destination is SharePoint. Is that correct, or
Yep,
do I
that's
have
correct.
that wrong?
Nope,
Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, so we're doing SharePoint and file shares as our originating sources with a destination source of SharePoint also. And one of the key reasons why we leveraged Smartlogic up front as part of our solution was because it already has integration capabilities with SharePoint. So it bolts on very seamlessly and allows you to do these things. There's a feature in Smartlogic also, which is potentially on our future roadmap, which even allows when someone is inputting a document into SharePoint, it will automatically classify the document. But our main goal here was to really get that single source in place, get all our historical content there as a first step, and then we'll look at other opportunities down the road.
And then there's, of course, my favorite question of all time, which is, do you recommend working with Smartlogic again? And remember when you answer that I know where you live.
I mean, this is Douglas. I'll start. I would definitely say yes. I mean, I think the solution suite was just what we needed to get started. You know, it has enterprise capability, although we're starting small. And I think the solution group that comes along, the knowledge experts at Smartlogic, really enabled us to hit the ground running. And as Adam mentioned, even with, you know, tweaking our business rules on a continuous basis. I mean, it really does, I think, to get the optimal solution in place, require kind of that information science mindset. And Smartlogic was not only able to bring the technology to the table, but they also brought a lot of that information science with them to help us leverage it to its best use.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Ann, and I'd like to give some energy back to Bob St. Clair from Smartlogic, who has been a great partner over the past couple of years. So I think you guys have always been able to give us great advice and even go so far as to work with us to create some custom reports, because we use some metrics to track how our auto classification rules are working, and it wasn't out-of-the-box Semaphore. So we were able to work with you to build some custom reports that go right to the database to generate some information for us. So I've had a great experience, and thank you.
Well, we thank you. You guys have been a great partner to work with. There are a couple of questions that are more technical around the capabilities of the tool, and if it's okay, I'll just take a moment to answer those. There's a question around traceability. Is there traceability that tells us who created items in the ontology, if those items are approved, and is there are there workflow reports that show where the taxonomy is in stages of development? And actually, I think I'm not going to answer this one. I'm going to let you guys answer it because you have experienced the capabilities that that Semaphore gives you for ontology creation and collaboration, and also for the implementation of governance and a workflow around the ontology.
Yeah, so Ann, maybe I'll say one thing about it, but I'll turn it back over to you only because, well, so first I'll say that there is certainly some audit trail capability that we leverage, and some reporting you can do based on the audit trail. So we do use that. I wouldn't say I'm an expert that can speak to that necessarily, and I will say that we are on an older version of Semaphore, and I know there's probably been some new additions to some newer versions that you would be better to speak to than I would. So that's really all I can say about it, Ann.
Okay.
So, Ann, before you jump in, I'll just throw one thing in. So, I mean, and this gets back to the SharePoint, right? So as part of SharePoint, there's a term store, and there's a ability to, as you're managing your ontology, to push that into the SharePoint term store and synchronize the content. So as part of the publication process and the governance that we've put in place, you know, we leverage that integration and push things to production in our environment on a regular basis. And it allows us to do it in a flexible, agile way. We've also built the capability, so as our taxonomy matures over time, we have the ability to resync all the taxonomy, all the documents that have been previously classified and update them to the most recent version of our taxonomy.
We actually have clients that are doing that in near real time. People who have, for example, some of the larger news organizations that have very dynamic taxonomies based on developments in the world are actually pushing the reclassification of knowledge assets with changes in the taxonomy out in real time. I believe that in at least one case, the performance requirement is that 400 or 500 milliseconds after the term is added, the corpus needs to be reclassified. So there are actually some very dynamic uses of that capability. I will also say that the auditability of the ontology in Smartlogic in Semaphore is one of the reasons that we have so many use cases in regulatory environments, because the ability to go back to a particular point in time, know what the condition or what was the state of the ontology at that particular point in time, and therefore what were the rules and why was something classified in a particular way, is absolutely critical when regulators are asking you to explain why you did things in a certain way or why you produced certain kinds of information. So there is a full audit trail, there is a very, very robust workflow, and there's the ability to take snapshots of the ontology at any point in time to know exactly what it looked like, what the relationships were, and what the rules were based on that particular point in time. So it's fully auditable, and I hesitate to use the word ACID compliant, but essentially that's it provides ACID-like functionality for the ontology, if that makes any sense. And I think with that, let me just look real quickly and see if there's anything else. Oh, there's a question here about, does the tool function as a crawler to collect the data, or is the data brought to the tool? The data is brought to the tool in some cases and crawled in other cases. When you are bringing things in the way that Merck is doing, for example, where they are ingesting large quantities of content that are brought by Kapow, those are pushed to the tool. When something is committed to the new SharePoint repository as part of the commission workflow, it will be pushed to the tool. There are also capabilities to crawl the data. For example, if you're starting with a blank sheet of paper to build a taxonomy, there are discovery capabilities that will crawl through your existing corpus of documentation to pull out words and concepts and terms that seem significant, to provide you with a way to seed your ontology development, as opposed to you know, trying to stand in front of a blank whiteboard with your eyes closed and think about it. And with that, yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it also integrates with FAST and search capabilities, right?
It absolutely does. It provides enhanced capabilities to everything from Google Search Appliance and Solr to the other major search engines. It integrates with any CMIS compliant database, for those of you who know, content management system, for those of you who are familiar with the CMIS standard, which is fundamentally a consortium-based standard for interacting with content management systems. And that includes, I think there's a list of about 100 or 150 of them, includes everything from Documentum and OpenText all the way to I can't even think of the names right now because there are so many of them. They can be actually found. There's a full list on Wikipedia of all of the CMIS compliant content management systems, and in addition to that, we also integrate with triple store databases like Smartlogic and Allegrograph. And with that, I think that we will close down the webinar. There are a few questions left which are very specific. We will be answering those by email. And once again, I thank all of you for coming to this webinar. Thank you, Douglas and Adam, for participating. You've been great. And your bribes will be in the mail shortly.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, and we will talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.